Recently, Ukraine has repeatedly crossed the line. Now, Ukraine's former foreign minister is strongly criticizing Korea, claiming Korea's God will judge the country for not sending weapons. Dmytro Kuleba, the former Ukrainian foreign minister, actually said that. Former Foreign Minister Kuleba stated that Russia believes it will be difficult for Ukraine to improve its ballistic missile defense capabilities in a short period of time, so it is reducing the production of other weapons and investing significant resources into the production of ballistic missiles. He also revealed that Russia is even importing missiles from North Korea and using those missiles to attack Ukraine. But here, he criticized South Korea, saying that South Korea is still turning its back on Ukraine and not providing weapon support, and even said that South Korea's God will judge South Korea. Of course, former Ukrainian Foreign Minister Kuleba only served as foreign minister until 2024 and does not currently hold any official position in the Ukrainian government. Ukraine continues to put strong pressure on South Korea. On August 9th, President Zelensky of Ukraine publicly stated that he wants to directly request anti-aircraft systems from South Korea. Of course, Ukraine has previously questioned why South Korea provides air defense systems such as the Chunggung system to the UN, the UAE, and other Middle Eastern countries, but not to them. However, it is unusual for President Zelensky of Ukraine to directly single out South Korea in this way. The South Korean government reiterated that under domestic law, it cannot supply defense materials to conflict zones and thus rejected Ukraine's request. President Zelensky of Ukraine keeps bringing up North Korea and pressuring South Korea. President Zelensky warned that as more North Korean troops gain combat experience in Russia, South Korea faces greater risk. He also spread baseless rumors that South Korean and Ukrainian diplomats were in contact about weapon support. Ukrainian media keep reporting as if the South Korean government has abandoned Ukraine, and previously released Ukrainian government materials are gaining renewed attention. On April 13th, the Ukrainian Defense Ministry's main Directorate of Intelligence announced that memory semiconductor components produced by Samsung Electronics were found inside a Russian reconnaissance drone. In the released photos, you can see that a component with a Samsung Electronics identification label is installed in the flight control device. The Ukrainian side analyzed the component and classified it as Samsung's DDR3 DRAM and 8GB eMMC 5.1 memory. In particular, DDR3 DRAM is an old type of memory that has been commercially available since 2007. Since these are general-purpose components that are far from cutting-edge semiconductors, this fact alone is not enough to conclude that Samsung Electronics was directly involved in the production of Russian military equipment. We need to distinguish between the presence of the semiconductors and their distribution channels. The materials from Ukrainian authorities did not specify when these components were made, when they entered Russia, or which companies distributed them. No evidence was released showing Samsung Electronics directly supplied these components to Russia or broke export controls. It's also possible that recycled components from other electronics or inventory from overseas markets ended up in Russia. We can't rule out that these parts may have reached Russia via intermediaries in third countries. Still, Ukraine highlights that Russian weapons used Samsung semiconductors. They go around talking as if Korea is supporting Russia. Even if they don't say it directly, they keep highlighting only that part. Since the Ukraine war began in 2022, Korea has maintained its policy of not directly supplying lethal weapons. Even during the Yoon Suk-yeol administration, often seen as the most likely to act, lethal aid to Ukraine was discussed, but actual support was limited to non-lethal safety gear like mine detectors and mine-clearing equipment. While Korea has continued to provide humanitarian and reconstruction support to Ukraine, it has maintained a clear line against directly supplying lethal weapons. However, there is a separate controversy surrounding 155mm artillery shells. This is because Korea sold or leased shells to the United States, and the United States then provided its own ammunition to Ukraine. This method led to Korean-made shells reaching Ukraine, but it's not the same as the Korean government directly supplying lethal weapons. Korea has taken a cautious stance between direct and indirect ammunition support, balancing security cooperation with the United States and its domestic and international considerations. Ukraine is now asking Korea for air defense systems because Russia's ongoing ballistic missile, cruise missile, and drone attacks are straining Ukraine's air defenses. Ukraine uses Western-backed air defenses, but continues to face shortages of interceptor missiles. On top of that, due to the Middle East war, a significant number of Korea's air defense missiles have been depleted, so the number of air defense missiles going to Ukraine has decreased even further. Various interception methods are being used against drones, but for threats like ballistic missiles that are fast and have a short response time, high-performance air defense systems and a sufficient number of interceptors are needed. Ukraine is interested in Korea's Chunggung series and other air defense systems. Additionally, Ukraine is offering new cooperation in drones. Ukraine has gained significant practical experience in drone use, production, and countering electronic warfare during the ongoing war. President Zelensky requested support from Korea for air defense systems and said Ukraine is ready to cooperate on drones. If Ukraine shares its technology and experience and Korea supplies air defense systems and technologies, this could create mutual military cooperation instead of one-sided aid. The problem is that, from Korea's perspective, accepting such requests is quite burdensome. In particular, there is ongoing dissatisfaction within the country regarding Ukraine's diplomatic approach. Even though Korea is already providing humanitarian aid and reconstruction support, if Ukraine publicly demands weapon support and appears to pressure Korea's existing policies, the Korean public may find it uncomfortable. If a country in the war is seen as demanding support without considering another nation's security, laws, or policy limits, resentment will grow. It's understandable that Ukraine is seeking international support. Without air defense systems during ongoing war, civilian casualties and infrastructure damage could rise. However, how support is requested is also a key diplomatic factor. Explaining why the other country can't directly supply weapons and highlighting the security and technology benefits Korea gains from working with Ukraine may be more effective. Since there are legal and security constraints on the scope and manner in which Korea can help Ukraine, continued pressure that ignores these conditions could actually have a negative impact on public opinion within Korea regarding support for Ukraine. Korea's ties with Russia are also a practical reason for not sending lethal weapons to Ukraine. If Korea directly provides weapons to Ukraine, Russia may perceive this as a significant shift in Korea's policy toward Russia. Until now, Korea has supported Ukraine while carefully avoiding actions that could lead to direct military conflict with Russia. Directly providing lethal weapons could be seen as going far beyond this standard. Korea is especially worried about Russia and North Korea's military cooperation. If Russia strongly opposes Korea sending weapons to Ukraine and increases military ties with North Korea, Korea's security could worsen. If military technology, equipment, or cooperation in training, reconnaissance, and intelligence is given to North Korea, South Korea may face a direct burden. How much technology Russia can provide to help North Korea advance its missile and nuclear capabilities is a sensitive issue for South Korea's security. Military technologies are already being supported, but this could get worse. They could provide various missile technologies and military weapons to North Korea. There could also be even more support in terms of food and resources than there is now. For South Korea, this situation itself could pose a security threat. Therefore, the current South Korean diplomatic authorities have determined that the harm caused by Russia supporting North Korea outweighs the benefits of supporting Ukraine, so they are refraining from providing lethal weapons. In particular, there are concerns that the North Korean military is accumulating modern warfare experience through the war involving Russia. If Russian support is further expanded in this situation, the problem could become even bigger. If North Korea gets satellite, reconnaissance, electronic warfare, drone tech, or missile operation experience from Russia, the threat level for the South Korean military could change. Even if South Korea gains diplomatic and military advantages by supplying weapons to Ukraine, we must consider that Russia-North Korea military cooperation could deepen as a result. Therefore, from the perspective of the South Korean government, it is not simply a matter of deciding whether to help Ukraine. They must determine how much support they can give without provoking more Russia-North Korea military cooperation while still protecting South Korea's security. South Korea's reluctance to supply lethal weapons also reflects a practical judgment that, apart from its willingness to support Ukraine, it must manage possible security consequences on the Korean peninsula. If relations with Russia worsen, it may become harder for South Korean companies to operate or do business there once the war is over. If Russia goes beyond diplomatic responses and chooses measures such as regulations or market access restrictions on South Korean companies, there could also be economic costs. South Korea must weigh the military benefits of helping Ukraine against possible diplomatic and economic fallout from straining relations with Russia.